This is Hearthstone Grandmasters for the Asia-Pacific region. We're right at the start of Week 5 here, which of course means we're past the halfway point and we are well into the round robin at this point. Most of our players played 2 matches last week to find a good place in the standings, but Ryvius was one of our 2 players who was only playing 1 match last week, which means he did take a win up to a 1-0 score, but now in our first match where he is playing up against Surrender, he needs to start ramping it up a little bit here, showing that he's actually got what it takes to end up at the top of Division A.
That is true. And from Ryvius, we always can expect a little bit of spice in the lineup. Last week, it was that Quest Malagos Warlock, which surprisingly, in my opinion, managed to take a win over Druid. But now he's got something, I guess, a little bit more standard, but still not one of the most broad decks, which is the Resurrect Priest. We've seen Priest and out of these lineups, but more so the Galakron lately, I would say.
Yeah, that's right. It's definitely felt like there's been a lot of innovation in the Galakron build of the deck overall, which is why players are a lot more comfortable bringing it. I mean, there is still Galakron in this deck. You could technically call this Galakron Warlock. The difference, of course, being that it doesn't run any of the Invoke cards. It's basically just relying on Galakron as a value generator, as far and away the most value-oriented of the Galakrons in order to take out those slow control matchups. I think last week, well, a couple of weeks ago, I should say, it was definitely not the version to bring, because we had that slightly weird 10-deck meta where there were a bunch of buffed-up health minions coming onto the board, and the AoE just didn't quite get there. But nowadays, I think I can very much respect the Resurrect version of the Priest, just as a slightly more solid endgame to actually close things out.
That's right. And from Surrender's end here, we're seeing the Zoo and the Demon Hunter that we talked a lot about a while ago, but Surrender is bringing what's starting to become one of his signature decks as well. I wouldn't put it as more of his signature than Staz's, of course, but Highlander Hunter is something that Surrender has been bringing since the last Hero Standing week, and got it again, and I think it's probably influenced at least part of the field, being Hunter as the 5th highest bring rate. As a class as a whole, of course, we might see some Face Hunter coming out of the woodwork later as well.
Yeah, Face Hunter is in a very interesting position because last week we loved it. High abundance of rogues that have an awful matchup against the Face Hunter. You're also doing well against any of the other slightly slower decks that didn't expect it. This week, of course, the abundance of rogue has been drastically lowered, which is one of its key praise for the Face Hunter. So this week, I'm a bit more partial, I think, to the Highlander Hunter overall, and I think it could put Surrender in a good position coming up in this series. But first things first, Gia, something we are going to see an awful lot of this weekend. Straight up, double warrior ban. No real thought about it there.
Definitely not. I think it just makes a lot of sense. Warrior deck seems to have no terrible matchups, and even the bad matchups, whenever I queue it up on ladder, I never feel like it's unwinnable. There are combinations of starting draws that you can just tempo them out with a win, or you can catch them off guard with an OTK at the end. As long as you're making good use of Battle Rage, it seems like the deck is unbeatable. So I respect people who respect Warrior.
Yeah, it feels to me the only matchups that I feel really unfavored in are just the ones that I don't know. Like when I match up against Quest Warlock, and I'm like, what is the game plan here? And all of a sudden they play 50 taunts on turn 20, and I've lost the game. But for all the standard decks that you're expecting to see in Grandmasters, I fully agree. Get it out the way. But then outside of that, I think the most interesting deck to me, and the one that I will say, is Druid there for Ryvius. Such an interesting inclusion in this metagame. And looks like it should be fairly well positioned overall. But before we can get there, Gia, we have another sight that we should definitely get used to this week in the Demon Hunter Mirror.
Oh, yeah. And of course, with the mirrors, we've got to talk about the differences in the build. And for Ryvius, the most interesting thing is the inclusion of double questing adventure, which of course probably gives the deck more firepower against something like Druid, which has less removal for tall minions. But in the mirror, I feel that it's probably going to hurt Ryvius more than it helps him.
It seems to be a fairly clear here with both of the Overslices in hand. Clearly Ryvius' game plan here is to set up a Satyr Overseer as soon as possible, or at least on the most powerful turn in the early game, and to get that immediate summon off of a Twin Slice.
It's true. We're also seeing the double beaming sidekicks in their lists, which is more of European technology, I would say. APAC a little bit late to come onto the trend, but definitely apt when you're going to be facing a lot of mirrors and possibly even face hunters.
I fully agree. I really like this innovation. And I think it's one of the real benefits that Surrender has, being so closely tied to a lot of European practice partners, obviously being teammates with Orange Fino and War Control, only one of whom is actually a GM anymore, but still very, very strong players.
The shade, though, Dark.
I'm just stating facts. I'm just saying that.
True.
I'm sub to all three. I'm allowed to be me.
Surrender's turn is a little bit lackluster here, which can be part of the downside of running a heavier one-drop package, but he's managed to hold on to the board. And Ryvius, still not a convenient way to expend, to both develop and build a board that isn't immediately dead to weapon from Surrender.
And therefore, I'm seeing a different plan starting to brew here, Gia, with the Frozen Veil Weaver off the top, or Frozen Shadow Weaver, sorry. He can freeze face on this turn, set up potentially for a Coin Warglaives on turn 4, and then do the classic combo already, even though it's only a few weeks old, of Satyr Overseer after you've played the Warglaives and just summon a board full of tutus.
Yeah, I definitely like the sound of that. Ryvius isn't under very much pressure, so I think he's taking the right line here, which is to hold off for more value, as you said, and Surrender, luckily for him, has drawn Kayn on curve here. But will he be trading this?
Yeah, that's the real question. I mean, it's the only thing he can spend his mana on this turn. And thereafter, I guess it becomes a question of whether or not you trade at all, because he does have the liberty to start going face, I think it's fair to say.
Mm-hmm. The upside for Surrender is that the Glavebound can come down on curve and active next turn, barring another Shadow Weaver. Oh, but it turns out that Ryvius is only running one.
Time grows short.
Yeah.
Hide behind your servants.
Well, yeah, I will say I like spending the mana on this turn. The trade or not becomes a little bit more confusing because, like you said, Coin second slice into Glavebound would have been a pretty devastating clear on the Altruist, as would just a Warglaives on its own. And this is what we see. The Warglaives comes down. The setup for Ryvius is there to start exploding onto the board next turn with the Satyr Overseer. The question now, Gia, how many charges does he expend? How greedy does he get with leaving stuff on board?
I was gonna say it looks fine to leave just, to clear just the Kayn and leave the other two, because they're only presenting 1 damage each. So essentially, by killing them now, this is only saving, from what we could see on board, 2 extra health. But maybe he's choosing to respect that health and say that getting 2 charges, or even 3 attacks with the Overseer would be enough. Sorry, it would just be 2.
Yeah, I don't actually like this line from Ryvius, I've got to be honest here, because the benefit of his play is that he is respecting Frozen Shadow Weaver, which has come off the top for Surrender, to be fair. But going into turn 5 for Surrender, when he has a weapon equipped, you're expecting Glavebound or Warglaives to want to be equipped here. 5 mana is a pretty crucial spot to spend more than just Frozen Shadow Weaver. And therefore for Ryvius, I would have liked to just hold on to it. Even if he loses life, he's still got the I-beams. And then he can just set up for that incredibly powerful swing with Overseer next turn.
Mm-hmm. You bring up a really good point about the I-beams. I think it was acceptable for him to take that extra 2 damage because he has that extra healing in hand. And Surrender, with an incredibly display here, holds off on the Glavebound on curve in order to prevent the weapon charge from Ryvius. It prevents a Glavebound coming off the other side and something like more development from Overseer.
And this is another good point. You know, maybe Ryvius was saying if he wouldn't want to go for the Glavebound over the freeze there, because generally in this matchup, he who Glavebounds last, Glavebounds hardest, in one of the most confusing and tongue-twisting phrases ever. Basically, if your opponent can Glavebound the 4 damage onto your Glavebound, you are significantly behind on board. And I think that's what Surrender is setting up for, is the reactive Glavebound instead of going too aggressive.
And it works out perfectly with his hand, because a Glavebound on the following turn, assuming that he would use his Twin Slice or even hold on to it, leads up into a Skull from the left side, really.
Right. Of course, he could have set up that turn for a Skull on turn 6 instead by playing out the Glavebound. It's not even necessarily to say that his play was objectively right. It just has, again, in this matchup, some upsides, some downsides. It's such a little delicate dance you have to play.
See, Ryvius also waiting for a safe turn to get down the Overseer. But I feel like it might have missed the ideal opportunity already.
Yeah, it takes an incredibly slow turn. Obviously, even with just one charge, you're still able to get 2 summons as long as there's a minion on board, because if you press the hero power, you attack with the weapon, it allows you to attack with the 1 damage again. But I agree that there were several opportunities where he could have gone for it a little bit sooner.
Surrender took the whole turn to think about whether another Frozen Shadow Weaver was warranted, but I think he's recognizing that this could be go time. Even though it's a little bit weak to a reactive Glavebound coming from the other side, he is then able to follow up with Skull and maybe try and go for the lethal damage.
And he can definitely rule out some cards that aren't the Glavebound, because there's only one in the deck, as you said. And also he knows that one of the cards is Second Slice, one was kept in the mulligan, so it's likely to not be a Glaive.
There's I'm sorry if I said 2 Glavebound, but there's... sorry, if I said 1 Glavebound, there are 2 Glavebounds, but 1 Frozen Shadow Weaver.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
No problem. Okay, here's the big push from Ryvius available, but Surrender is able to remove at least the most threatening minion and set up for what could be a powerful next few turns. Oh my gosh.
Yep, there is just so much damage here. It is going to be a mighty uphill battle here for Ryvius to turn things around. We are talking about Skull off the top. He's not even running the Spectral Sight, as that has become very unfashionable at this point.
Yeah, Surrender just has 11 damage available next turn. We see, of course, that Ryvius has IB, but even if he takes a turn to heal what will most likely be by damaging his own minion, because I doubt Surrender is going to play his Blazing Battle Mage, how can Ryvius race Surrender?
Well, I guess the answer then could be Skull off the top into 2 Questing Adventurers in order to just get, like, lethal damage on the board next turn.
Yeah.
It seems unlikely, but I think that's where we're at.
Okay, there's a questing, not quite the Skull. Ryvius could play 3 Slices and the I-Beam if he wants to. And we can quite clearly see that if he does not play the I-Beam, he is just dead. Surrender goes Hero Power, attack, play Glavebound for 5. With the Second Slice, and then he Metamorphosis for the other 5 damage.
Yeah. The one part that is clear here for Ryvius, whether or not he smells the lethal on the other side, is that this is the all-in turn. There is no coming back from this if he doesn't just try and set up a lethal on the next turn. And he sees it.
All right. That looked less than a tiny sip from Surrender. So it seems that Surrender still got the mana to set up for a 2-turn while also freezing the questing if he likes.
Right. I'm just trying to count up if that gave him lethal. I think it's still 1 off. Right. It's 13 damage I think you can get together. All encompassing.
What he can do is hold back on the Glavebound altogether this turn. Just set up the Metamorphosis and get that hero power in so that he gets the full 10 damage over 2 turns and then can use the refreshed regular hero power to attack and get the Glavebound.
Love it. I don't think he's ever dying that way. Even with Skull off the top, because of course, once the questing is frozen, can't do anything.
Is it cold in the shadows?
Very clean. I remember a very cool play from Ryvius last week where he shut off an opposing Glavebound lethal by taunting up his own huge minion. But I don't think that's available for him now because he's not playing any taunts in the deck.
Wait, you're telling me that Demon Hunter has weaknesses, Gia? That definitely doesn't sound right.
Oh, when did taunt become a weakness? It's not when you're running Kane.
I meant not having taunt is a weakness.
They will never catch me.
Gotta be some miracles here, but there's no more healing available for Ryvius.
Yep, he's just got to pray that he can survive somehow. He's... Oh, no, wait, he knows
100%
he's dead with the
knows.
second slice.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I guess he just has to pray that his memory is bad and that he can't remember that the second slice is his best out at this point. He can live in blissful ignorance for another 5 seconds.
And that was a gulp that Ryvius took, not just a small sip. The Surrender is going to take the first victory here, although I would say that you shouldn't feel too bad about losing a Demon Hunter mirror, because among the 3 decks that remain after Warrior is banned, I feel like you're most comfortable to get a win with Demon Hunter at some point.
Absolutely, Gia. And it was, again, such an interesting matchup. Say what you will about Demon Hunter. Personally, I bloom in love with the class. I think it makes for such interesting decision points there. And Ryvius, in his little back and forth that he had in the setup with the Warglaives of Azeroth, I think that was such a good line he took, going with the freeze on turn 3 to set up for the Warglaives on turn 5. But the weird thing, the way it worked out, was just whether or not he should have attacked into the minions there. The line he did take probably did end up being the best one overall, but there were so many punishes either way, basically just playing around freeze.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is really difficult to say, because we could talk about the alternate universe where, let's say, he did leave up the 2 minions and held extra charges. He gets frozen. The next turn, he still gets to attack, but he's taken, I think, 2 extra down each of the minions, so 4 less health on the face, and that's very crucial in this matchup. We saw towards the end there that if he didn't I-beam his own minion, he would have just died a turn earlier.
Well, Gia, I think that the lore of the Asia-Pacific cinematic universe is rich enough already without having to delve into the alternate universes, which things get very, very murky. The canon gets weird when you start going into there. But that does mean, of course, with the first game out of the way in the Demon Hunter mirror, going in Surrender's favor, we're all done with our first game. We're going to head to a quick break before we continue the rest of this series with Ryvius versus Surrender after this.
Language Hacker, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, Subtle, thank you for having me.
Oh, no, the pleasure is mine.
I assure you, Subtle, the pleasure is all mine.
Would you like to have a seat?
Yeah, sure. After you, of course.
Oh, no, you're the guest. You sit.
I don't think I can. I need you to sit down, Subtle.
Okay. No, really,
Subtle, please just sit down.
Okay, together. 3, 2, 1, sit.
Okay.
3.
On sit or on 1?
We go 3, 2, 1, sit on 0.
Okay.
3, 2, 1, sit. Damn it. 1-0 to me, hi. Actually, before we get started, do you want a bottle of water or anything I can get for you?
No, thank you, but I actually did just make you some hot tea. I know it's your favorite.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, it's good, but you forgot the lemon.
Don't forget the lemon.
Damn, this guy's good. I gotta focus.
How's Grace?
Oh, she's great. Thanks for asking. How does he know my wife's name?
And Kupo and Shinx?
And how on earth does he know the names of my cats? Oh, they're good. That's incredible. You don't forget anything, do you?
Well, Subtle, we Canadians like to remember things about our friends.
That's so sweet. I don't know what to say. Wow. I didn't even realize we were friends.
You don't have to say anything, Subtle. I'm just happy to be here with my 4th favorite caster.
Wow, what a guy. Wait, 4th? What the
Welcome one and all to Hearthstone Grandmasters, here once again for the Asia-Pacific region, when we are well into our first game of the day here for week 5, and it is Ryvius versus Surrender Gear. We had a very standard matchup up first in the Demon Hunter mirror, but now we've got something a little bit different in the Resurrect Priest versus Highlander Hunter. Not a matchup I've seen all too often.
Definitely. Much like the name of the deck itself, Resurrect Priest seems to have come back from the dead after a couple of off weeks, now has a rise in representation. And what I'm really curious about is how the build is coming together, because I'm really looking at how much of the single target removal they're running, the respect for things like Demon Hunters, things like double Holy Smite or double Penance being standard, but sometimes you'll see things like Forbidden Words included there. And Ryvius has got one copy of it.
Yeah, it is overall an incredibly anti-aggro build of the deck, going so far as to include 2 injured Tolvirs in the deck, which obviously you don't really want to resurrect 2 mana cards in a deck that relies almost entirely on the power of Psychopomp and Mass Resurrection later on in the game. But of course, when injured Tolvir is played and it goes down to a 2-3, when you resurrect it, it's a 2-6 because it doesn't take the battle cry damage. And going a Tolvir into Psychopomp, you want to stop some aggression, that is a fantastic way to do so.
I would definitely agree, but I wonder if stopping aggression in the early game is enough to get there against Highlander Hunter that has more of a mid-game build and the ability to go late just with cards like Dino Tamer Brand and Zephyrus.
That is a very good point, Gia, because that is the deceptive power of Highlander Hunter. It has that early game aggression that you can hit, well, with a hand like this, Scavenger's Ingenuity, being able to get you a guaranteed 3-cost beast is an incredibly powerful start here. But also, Surrender very likely will curve very well into the late game. Sorry, I take that back. He's also playing the copy of Phase Stalker thrown in there as well, which is not very common.
I would definitely agree. We've seen Phase Stalker more often in Face Hunter, but we're seeing that the secret package from Surrender includes Explosive Trap alongside Snake Trap, so I think that's also a nod to the frequency of Demon Hunters that we would see.
Already kind of an interesting choice now for Ryvius to not go for the Penance, because with this hand, what I'm clearly seeing here that he should try and set up is Tolvir into Coin Grave Runes, or Tolvir on 3 into Grave Runes on 4. But of course the hero power from Dwarven Sharpshooter would sort that out. It goes a little bit deeper when you consider his opponent is likely to have a rushing beast at that point, so maybe he just cleverly makes the decision that Tolvir into Grave Runes on curve is just not something that's happening this game.
And we can see the power of Scavenger's Ingenuity. Even though Surrender didn't get one of the premium statted minions for 3 mana, it's still so problematic for Ryvius to deal with. He's not running Shadow Word. Sorry, there's 1 copy of Shadow Word Death in the deck, but even so, you'd be hesitant to play it against a Phase Stalker when there are so many larger targets.
Yeah, I really like this play from Surrender. Against a lot of decks, Desert Spear is crucial to get down as soon as you can, just because it offers you so much consistent board control, effectively 2 damage every turn for 3 turns. But in this matchup, you just don't really need it, to be perfectly honest. Not until you're taking out the Reborns of a Kartut or the Bone Wraith, and therefore 5 damage on the board. Let's go, sets up for so much damage.
He's got another option to pile on if he wants to go for Zephyrus into Power of the Wild, but it might be too low value of a use for Zephyrus because, as you did mention, there's tons of Reborn minions, and Zephyrus is one of the best ways to get rid of those with something as simple as a Hex or Earthshock.
Oof. If we go wide, GM, maybe even, dare I suggest, a Mass Dispel is one of my personal favorites.
I do remember getting some lethals with Highlander Hunter with Mass Dispel off of Zul'jin back in the day.
Oh, now you're talking my language.
But it does look like Ryvius will hardly get the chance more than 1 minion a turn.
Which is basically the primary weakness of this deck, right? You're only really playing down 1 on-curve minion from like turns 5 through 10 is kind of the idea, until you start resurrecting them back and making your powerful plays to push back into the game. But for the moment, it is looking at trying to set up combos, potentially, I don't know, Holy Nova into Holy Nova, or, well, Holy Nova, Coin Penance. It's a huge amount of resources to expend, but technically does clear this board.
And he does identify that, because the alternative option of going something like coin into the infiltrate for the next turn to coin into Cartoon is far too slow for Ryvius. There's just no way he gets to land a Grave Runes safely with his hand. So he's saying, let me try and clear this board and then stick a minion. It's gonna be a lot of damage in the process, but I do think this is his best path to victory.
So Surrender has, as I count it, 16 damage he could go for with Zephyrus into Savage Roar. Obviously, if it's not lethal, I don't think it will offer the Savage Roar here. So even though you're starting to look at lethal setups, I don't think it's here quite yet. So given that a Holy Nova has just come down, Surrender will definitely be running through, okay, what's likely to happen? Is he actually going to clear my board here? And how do I best set up for that?
See him reaching for the snake trap here. I'm actually looking at the kill command straight to face. I really like this.
Really?
It looks as though he won't be having that much time to play more than one piece of burst per turn, given that Zephyrus will be given one. And then he'll also want to fit in Varanus at some point if the board gets cleared. Fitting in the hero power also has that added upside of thinning his deck by pulling out the explosive trap.
I remain a little unconvinced, to be honest, given that Desert Spear gives you basically a guaranteed beast whenever you want it in order to go for the kill command phase, and I think that maybe was a slightly better use of the mana. But if he wants to close things out super, super quick, then sure, I guess you could definitely argue that he just doesn't have time.
My argument is that Snake Trap pretty much does nothing in this matchup. Priest will not attack. They'll play a minion and you'll attack them in order to kill them.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I wanted to go Desert Spear.
Oh, just preemptive setup. Okay.
Yeah.
Question is now whether he wants to play Varanus for the body and give up the battle cry, which is very useful against Priest if they play a big taunt.
And not only that, Gia, he's also got the two best cards in hand to synergize with it, with Desert Spear and the Unleash the Hound.
That's true.
It's such a big expenditure to use it here, but at the same time, not playing it is 7 damage that you're potentially not getting to the face.
And the alternative option is to play Zephyrus into Water Elemental, I think.
Yeah,
really doesn't feel good. Now we can
absolutely
get
does not.
a very nice silence from this.
Whoa.
Just depends what size of silence he wants. He play the Desert Spear first, and I think Zephyrus would still give you Earthshock.
Right, yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, there's no way you can get lethal this turn. I was wondering if there was any way you could get through it another way and then get like Wind Fury, but it just isn't quite there.
I recall in the recent patch, Zephyrus now can better recognize situations where you would rather get Polymorph over Hex. And this is one of those situations where you want to immediately attack with a minion going to face.
That's actually a good point. I'm not even sure it's necessarily the best play because you'd rather equip the Desert Spear first, but for science purposes, I'd love to see that.
Okay, we're gonna see Surrender going for leaving it up altogether. This is very interesting to me.
And I guess this is basically just dependent on the fact that or because of the fact, I should say, that he got Zixor Prime off of the top. All of a sudden, those 2 6s that he has to burn his way through don't actually look that scary.
Not at all, especially with the Desert Spear to help shore up those little bits of extra damage. He's holding on to Zephyrus for flexibility. He doesn't need to use it for silence this turn. Could very well become burst instead.
How much damage are we looking at now? If this is Mass Dispel, 2 damage off lethal? Oh no, there's no dragon in hand, sorry. Okay, so the Corrosive Breath can't do it, so 3 damage off lethal.
And Surrender could say, well, I could draw a dragon off the top, and that sets up for hero power plus Corrosive Breath lethal, even if Priest does heal. But it seems quite ambitious, given that he doesn't have a dragon, and the second that he leaves up these minions, Ryvius could start taking advantage of Grave Runes and the like.
Well, the alternative play is Zix or Prime and try to chew through everything, to which Surrender just says, you know what, we're going to get through this right here and now.
There you go. Zephyr still gives Mass Dispel even if you don't play the hero power first, apparently. Good for Surrender.
There is the dragon, Gia.
So now for Ryvius, he's got to defend and heal, but his Hearthstone that's already on the board is silenced.
Soul Mirror, close as anything, but again, just does not protect him at the same time.
Now, there's no way for him to play his second Hearthstone and kill it off. And for Ryvius, of course, you're not thinking of doing that. You cannot afford to play around Corrosive Breath. The more immediate problem is the board itself.
So if he goes Grave Runes on his Kartut Defender and then just sacrifices it in, it still just doesn't get there. He could sacrifice it in and then Forbidden Words his own Kartut Defender, which technically keeps him alive in terms of health total. But I'm pretty sure that's just wrong because he has to pretend that the Corrosive Breath isn't there.
As far as Grave Runes onto Kartut and trade it off, though, I think this is definitely correct. It's the best defense he can put onto the board as we see it. And he'll probably end up using Forbidden on an opposing minion. There you have it. And this is a very, very clean setup from Surrender.
This was just a very, very clean game. Time and time again we are seeing with this Highlander deck why he relies on it so heavily, because it just gets the job done against such a wide array of decks here. In this matchup, functioning as an aggressive slash mid-rangey damage archetype that was just so consistently able to get underneath, or so effectively I should say, able to get underneath the defensive maneuvers from the Priest, because it was just too quick.
Yeah, the way that the deck is built allows Hunter to get the board before Priest can really put up their walls. And then with the burst that they have at the top end, they can ignore the walls and go straight to the dome. But that's thanks in large part to Surrender's timing. We were looking at using the silence from Zephrys a lot earlier to cash in the Verana's damage immediately. But Surrender was saying, no, you probably don't have your one of Shadow Word Death. And you can't guarantee a Galakrond if I have more than one minion. So he builds a board that says Soul Mirror and Death or Bust. And then if it's not there, he can set up a guaranteed lead for the following turns.
Overall, it was just a great example of playing around your opponent's removal pieces as well as possible. On turns 3 and 4, he floated a mana, whereas he could have had perfect mana expenditure on both turns, just in order to get the most awkwardly shaped minion on board for his opponent as possible. It meant once the Phase Stalker came down, if you death it, there's still something on board attacking you face. Holy Nova, while it takes out some things, it doesn't take out everything. It took 3 removal pieces in the double Holy Nova plus the Penance just to clear off his starting board. And at that point, the Hunter's just so far in the lead.
He really was. And I think that that particular play of the Veranas on curve, it looks very straightforward, but because what you mentioned of the hand being Unleash the Hounds and Desert Spear, I think it takes at least a couple, some time of experienced Hearthstone under your belt to forego the very enticing bows like that. Because when you start building a deck and you have these cards put in, oftentimes it's with Veranas in mind. So it really takes good recognition to realize when breaking up the combo is much more useful.
It really, really does. And now, speaking of the combo, Zoo is the remaining deck for Surrender, which weirdly enough, despite what you may think about Zoo, at the moment feels like it functions a little bit more like a deck that does mini combos rather than just the good old school version of Zoo that just threw stuff onto the board. I'm specifically talking about cards like the Scrap Imp, or I am specifically talking about Scrap Imp, and the Hand of Gul'dan here, which once discarded can draw your entire deck. And right at the start, Surrender has the Scrap Imp ready to go. This is already, even before he discards the other 3 cards, a pretty premium hand.
Really is, just because of Scrap Imp being able to make these cards that you would want to toss in the mulligan. If any of them come back, they're suddenly huge threats for Priest to deal with. And I think that the ways that Zoo's threats are actually timed to come down on the board makes it quite awkward for Priest, because Priest wants to be playing their Penances and their Breath of the Infinite in the early turns on smaller minions. But by the time the Scrap Imp goes off, a lot of the Zoo minions will be out of that health range, and then Ryvius won't actually have the mana to get rid of everything immediately. But he does have this Archmage Vargoth, which could give Surrender problems.
Very true. That is one of the more powerful things you can do in the early game.
The full keep.
It looked like the full keep there. This is something I was talking about during playtesting a fair bit, because I got this more or less this exact hand where you have a Scrap Imp and 3 1-drops. Because to be perfectly honest, in this deck, most of the 1-drops are just completely interchangeable. And when I asked, do I just keep this? This looks good. The answer is generally, you have so many 1-drops in your deck that you just want to mulligan for Hand of Gul'dan and Magic Carpet. But apparently, Surrender's got the best of both worlds.
It really does. I definitely understand the argument for Hand of Gul'dan, but I think that probably Carpet is less significant in this matchup, where you do feel like you'll be having the board immediately, and at most you're going to rush into 1 minion a turn. It might be better just to get the most attack on board immediately, and that is what Surrender is going to do.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Have you ever seen a board that is more resilient to a Breath of the Infinite? Don't answer the question, because obviously yes is the answer, but this is still very resilient to Breath of the Infinite is my point.
If you just added the phrase on turn 3 to that sentence, I would actually say, no, I have not seen a board more resilient against Breath of the Infinite on turn 3.
Oh. Well, we've been the motif for today has been get used to things we'll be seeing a lot of. This is another one of them. Zoo just absolutely getting the job done.
Yeah, look at this. He could even just ship the Wolf Rider face. He could trade in his 3/5 and 3/3 to kill off Vargoth, and everything still lives past 1 Holy Nova or 1 Breath of the Infinite. And the Shield Bearer can come down.
So the point here, Gia, is you do have to kill the Vargoth, right?
Yes, because otherwise the board isn't resilient against Holy Nova / Breath of the Infinite.
There's just so many different ways you can go about it. Each more effective than the last.
Alright, Surrender says, I don't care if my Fiendish Servant gets damaged, because if you AoE this down, I'm getting the damage back anyway. Almost
better for him if it dies. And now with only the Convincing Infiltrator now down for Ryvius to give him a chance, I don't think there's any other play you're considering. He could say, I'm so far behind that I have to hit Holy Nova off the top in order to go with this Breath of the Infinite, but I just don't think that even gets there.
Yeah, the thing is, with leaving Carpet up, you're essentially only playing the Infiltrator for its Death Rattle.
Okay,
and not the wall that the taunt itself provides. So I like using the Forbidden Words there and setting up the Bone Wraith. But still, I don't know how Ryvius is getting this one. Surrender can refill right now. First, he needs to think about the order in which he wants to do the trades, because if the Fiendish goes in, he wants it to have the best chance of landing on any of the other 4 minions that are already on the board.
Looks to me like it's probably not going in on this turn, though, right? Wouldn't it be Wolf Rider and then Expired Merchant, and then you just trade in one of your lower attack guys?
I was thinking Wolf Rider, then trade in the Fiendish.
Okay, okay.
But Surrender is just going to look for something more convenient off the top of the deck. That is convenient.
That'll do.
At least for the first half. Then he'll have to ship 3 damage into the second half, but I don't think that's any sweat off his back. Still pushing 13 face, or even more if he wants to play abusives.
Just absolutely absurd amounts of damage, and he knows we're still a turn away from Soul Mirror. Double Breath of the Infinite doesn't even get the job done here to keep Ryvius alive. This is just GG.
Imagine not casting APAC there. 3-0s everywhere. Aggro decks everywhere. Or at least they're stomping against the non-aggro decks.
Couldn't be me, Gia. and couldn't be Ryvius as Surrender takes the 3-0 sweep here. This is only his second game of the round robin as well, and despite losing his first series, sorry, up against Glory, he manages to bring it up now to 1-1 in terms of his overall record. And of course, Ryvius joins him there at 1 win and 1 loss each. Overall, just an unbelievably convincing win there from Surrender. I think he played it well, but the main thing is just his aggressive lineup is looking very dominant at the moment.
I will say that he played it very well, but we do, I think, we don't have a very accurate picture of how aggro decks would line up this week, because we saw that the deck that underperformed for Ryvius was Priest, which is not a very common bring at all. And perhaps that's why we saw Ryvius trying to queue it up, just get it out of the way. Or maybe he had a different take on how the matchup works altogether. I feel like if you're confident enough to be bringing Priest, you must have enough testing against these common decks that you might see in the 3rd and 4th slot.
Maybe you could argue that his draw was a little bit unfortunate given how low curving he's made his particular build of the Resurrect Priest with the Tolviz, Shadow Madness, Penance, all that goodness in the early game in order to remove off the board. I can fully see your point that it was really the one weak deck there for Ryvius and maybe wasn't performing how you thought. But of course, with that out of the way, we can take a look at what are the rest of the matches that we have yet to come today, now that Surrender has taken a very swift win. And up next year, we're going to have Tyler versus Dawn.
Yeah, that is going to be a very fun one. Tyler, I hope, has gotten all of his appliances fixed, which would be better, worth noting, because I'm still not able to get my audio together. But it's fine. A Roomba matters way more than a microphone in the grand scheme of things. And Dawn, with the Warlock, I think he's bringing Zoo, no longer a Galakrond fan, which I can definitely get behind.
Yeah, Dawn is a player who's in a very interesting spot for me because I hold him in very high regard. But I think for me, in the last couple of weeks, he hasn't been showing me the goods.